everyone, and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we are discussing My Brilliant Friend Season 4, Episode 8. This was a very intense episode. There's a lot to unpack, and it will have grave repercussions moving forward. The episode begins and we see that Elena is thriving. She's very successful, and she's having a talk about her book, specifically about Naples. And she's trying to explain the complexities of this place, and this word degradation comes up repeatedly. And Naples is framed as a place that's either just too far gone to salvage or has just been completely forgotten about. Now that Elena has lived inside and outside of Naples, she realizes that this is not just an area where bad things happen. It's intricately connected to everything else in Italy. And I do appreciate the fact that she doesn't lean into any stereotypes. She tries to broaden her readers' understanding. Like, Naples, in a lot of ways, represents the best and worst of what Italy has to offer. I do love that she doesn't exploit her upbringing or write trauma porn, because we know, following Elena, that Naples has a terrible reputation. Her husband really hated the place. Pietro despised Naples, and he blamed a lot of her actions on her upbringing. And it seems like every single outsider that comes to visit Naples wants to leave. And we saw that with the photographer in a few episodes ago. Like, she just wanted to take the pictures and get out. And this is the type of place where people love reading about it and fantasizing about it, but no one wants to actually pay it a visit. They don't really want to know what comes with it. Like, it's kind of a form of entertainment, and I think she was trying to get them to see it as a real place. And during this time, she's been traveling, she's been very successful. She notes how detached she has been from her daughters. She hasn't been calling them as much. She's been just very, very busy with her work. And it seems like she's having some trouble balancing being a single mother and also trying to maintain this career. It seems like at the moment she is heavily relying on Lila to take care of them, Emma in particular. On the bright side, we have officially moved on from Nino. I don't even like saying his name. On the downside, he has completely ghosted this family, including his daughter. The only time we see Nino is on TV, and because we know him, we know that he's a liar. However, he seems to be doing very well. He sounds very convincing, and it's just really funny watching him because we know that he believes in nothing. And something I noticed this episode is that whenever Nino comes on TV, they gather around like as a family and they watch him as if he's still part of this family. And he has had a profound effect on their lives. And I think her two other daughters feel abandoned by him also. He just completely, it was as if he was never in their lives to begin with. For better or worse, Elena does seem happier. She doesn't get any more of these paranoid thoughts. She's even flirting early on. Like, she seems to just have moved on completely. And everything seems to be going really well until she receives a phone call informing her that Emma is really sick. And throughout this episode, we notice that Emma is just not really a happy child. Unlike her other two sisters, Emma doesn't have any stable male figure in her life, and her mother is not really there that often. Like, she's always traveling. She's trying to provide for them, and I think this is making her feel very sad and lonely. I thought the scene at the end with Pietro trying to gift her was really tragic, because she doesn't want somebody else's father. She wants her own. Like, she doesn't want to borrow somebody else's loved one. Like, she wants a stable figure for herself, and she just doesn't really have that. It also doesn't help that her sisters keep comparing her to Tina. Like, this is adding some extra pressure. We find out that Emma was suffering from pneumonia, and luckily Lila knew what to do. Although Lila hates giving birth, it seems like she really enjoys being a mother. Like, she really does look after her daughters very well. And the more time they spend together, I can't even tell whose apartment is whose anymore. Like, it feels like they've become one big family. Like, they've kind of merged into one. At the hospital, Lila informs her that not only is her daughter sick, but she's being sued by Carmen. And up until this point, Elena has been a bystander in Lila's war with the brothers, and now she's actively involved in it. Carmen's lawsuit is obviously influenced by those two brothers, and it's their way of telling Elena to shut up about the neighborhood. Like, they do not want to see their name in the press. And this lawsuit really just destroys her self-esteem. She doesn't really know how to feel anymore. And up until this point, I feel like she's lived a double life. Kind of been on the outside looking in and observing and reporting, and now she's fully in it. The lawsuit is the first indication we get to how bad things are getting in the neighborhood. Like, it is time to get out of this place. We bump into Antonio, who has warned us multiple times that this is not a place you want to stay for very long. It seems like he's going back to Germany with his family, and he's being kicked out by Miguel. And I'm sure that's a way of making Lila feel weak, because Antonio has a very strong loyalty to her, and maybe removing her from the picture does make Lila feel less protected. He also warns her that Lila's ego is out of control, and she genuinely believes that together they are invincible, but this is not the case. I do think a part of the reason Lila encouraged her to move in the apartment beneath her is to feel more safe. One of my favorite parts in this conversation is when Antonio informs Elena that he's taking his mother with him to Germany, and that way he can keep an eye on her to see what he will become, because he's developing a lot of the same traits and like anxieties that his mother had growing up. I thought this was such a profound moment, because so much of this show is about individuals trying and failing to escape their past traumas. And depending on where you're from, this can really be an uphill battle. And Elena is just a great example of how your upbringing can really affect you. Like, in a lot of ways, she's made it. She's made it out of the neighborhood, but in a lot of ways, she also hasn't. And you see that with her relationship to Nino and how long that went on for. And Antonio is basically telling her, like, if you keep going back to the past, everything you've worked for, like, girl, you might not have a future. Like, you need to get out of here now. As happy as Elena is, she really is struggling. And I think this tension between the past and the present is played out through this limp that she develops randomly throughout the episode. This limp only appears when she's very stressed and she doesn't really know what to do. And I would actually equate this limp with her daughter's eye tic. This is largely a psychological issue. In the case of her daughter, this eye twitch that she keeps having, this tick in her eye, this is an emotional trauma. She just doesn't have the stable male figure in her life, and I think that's really hindering her ability to develop like Tina is developing. I think it's interesting how both of their traumas is being played out physically. Like, they're both struggling, just for slightly different reasons. In the background, we can see that the drug trade is out of control. It is in plain sight. Like, it is just horrific. This episode confirms that Lila's son, Gennaro, is a drug addict, and he seems very far gone. And I think he's a symbol of how common this problem has become. Like, if Lila cannot stop her son from using drugs, what power does anybody else in this neighborhood really have? I don't know how much longer Elena can justify living in this neighborhood, because at this point she does have the means to leave. It seems like her book is very successful, so there's really no reason to keep her daughters here anymore. Like, unfortunately, we don't spend that much time with her daughters, but there seems to be a lot of drama going on. Dede is fully in love with Lila's son, and Dede is becoming a teenager, and it seems like she's going through a lot, and she's going through it alone, and her mother isn't really in the headspace to take it all in. I think the stress of this lawsuit and trying to raise 3 daughters by herself is really starting to get to her. During an evening together, Lila encourages Elena to write about the lawsuit. Now, Carmen's lawsuit is ridiculous and it should be made fun of. So I did agree with Lila on that front. Like, it was just preposterous. Like, it was just clearly a way of getting to her. Now, I'm very torn about Lila's intentions with Elena, because one way I do believe Elena's paranoia about Lila using her as a shield is 100% justified, because during this conversation, she suggests, like, I can totally get a writer, like another writer, to research and publish about this issue. Like, I don't have to use my name. But Lila is very insistent that Elena writes the article and takes credit for it, even though she knows that this will put her and her daughters at great risk. And despite how kind of shady that is, I genuinely do think that Lila overestimates Elena's influence. Just because she's famous doesn't really mean she has any power. Like even if her article gets traction, it certainly will not be enough to throw Marcello and his brother in prison, considering that they probably do have police officers and politicians on their payroll. Try and encourage Elena. Lila reminds her of the article she wrote about Bruno and that horrific meat factory she used to work at. And the way that Lila framed it is interesting because Elena did not write a hit piece on Bruno. Like, she wrote about the factory. Like, Bruno was a symptom of a bigger problem. But in this context, Lila doesn't really care about the bigger problem, which is crime in Italy and corruption. She wants to take them down any means necessary. Now, as smart as Lila is, nothing can protect you against crazy. Like, I don't care what article you write, like, nothing is going to stop those brothers. Now, it's not until Alfonso's death that Elena finally agrees to go along with what Lila wants. Now, Alfonso's death came out of nowhere, and I do think his storyline was poorly written, and his death did not have the emotional impact it should have, because the series just didn't really have time. Like, he felt like a very lazy plot device to show us that Lila was becoming scared and how a lot of the violence around her is like slowly creeping up on her. I just think his character was not utilized in a way that was very meaningful. I didn't see Lila looking for him. Maybe she did. I didn't even really feel their connection throughout the series. But anyways, his death triggers this funeral, and this funeral is Miguel and Lila's breaking point. Like, they are done tiptoeing around each other. I thought the contrast of Lila and Elena trying to stand up to these brothers was just really sad, because, you know, they're doing their best, but just like when they were children, they don't stand a chance. They're shoved to the ground as if they're nothing. It's like all the work they had done up until this point didn't change anything about the dynamics in this neighborhood. Now, Lila decides she's done beating around the bush, and she tells Elena to come with her to talk to the brothers. And I really do think Lila feels invincible with Elena, like nothing can touch them, nothing can harm them, but she totally miscalculated. I thought Miguel saying to Lila, "You should leave while you still can," was hella ominous. And I really believe he's crazy and he has a plan. And if you notice Marcello in this scene, he's looking at his brother like he doesn't even know what he's going to do. Like, he barely has control over him. I thought that slap heard from around the world was a major turning point, because he was basically letting her know that what happened to Alfonso is going to happen to you. And the fact that he slapped her in broad daylight was really telling, because whatever Lila thinks she has on him, he really doesn't care. And to make matters worse, he shoves Elena too, and he's like, "By the way, you're also responsible. Like, I didn't forget about you either." And they're both kind of sitting there on the ground, totally just, they don't know what to think. And it's in that moment, Elena was like, you know, "Get in, loser. We're going to burn this guy to the ground." Like, she saw the impending doom. And it was only a matter of time before these brothers came at them more directly. So they might as well engage first. I really do love this scene of them working together. Like, this is a side note, but I love Lila's aesthetic this season. Like, if you notice her nails, I don't know how much Lila makes, but she is filthy rich. Like, her whole aesthetic is just giving rich. And like, I don't know, there was a scene where she was passing the book to Elena to read with all the records of, you know, of all the numbers. And you see her like perfect nails and then Elena's plain nails. Like, I don't know why, I just thought that was so funny. But yeah, her aesthetic is fantastic. And this is the first time we see them actively collaborating. And it seems like Lila has an arsenal of information against the brothers that she is convinced will send them to jail, or at least trigger an investigation. And working with Lila has always been in the back of Elena's mind, and it really does trigger something inside of her. She finally realizes why Lila thought her novel was really bad, because it was trying to be something that it wasn't. This piece that she's working on with Lila, like, she doesn't really have a framework for it. There's nothing to copy. There's no model. So they have to kind of write the article in a way that makes sense to them. And for that reason, it feels more authentic and more real, because they're able to basically create a template of their own. And the whole time they were writing, I'm like, oh my God, they might actually send them to jail. And just before she makes the decision on whether or not to publish, she sends the article to her publisher, who basically informs her that there is nothing in this piece that will send anyone to jail. However, she should publish because it's a great piece. And this terrifies Elena. And she is reluctant, and rightfully so, because no amount of fame is going to stop a bullet. So at this point, she runs the risk of publishing an article with her name on it that clearly targets two men who are capable of murder. Like, that is never a good idea. In her previous novel, like, this was fiction, so she could kind of get away with it because she changed names and locations, even though everyone in the neighborhood knew it was about them. But she could kind of claim ignorance. But this is like a very clear hit piece, and there's just no way to avoid the brothers' wrath if this article becomes public. She then informs Leela that this whole thing is canceled, and also looks very worried and paranoid. I think Alfonso's death messed her up. We don't know how badly yet, but she does seem worried. And I thought the scene of Leela watching Elena walk away while she was limping was really funny for some reason, because it was just giving evil eye, like, how dare you not publish this article. And Leela basically decides on her own to go ahead and give the green light. And she does this without consulting her. Again, I do think Leela genuinely believes that if this article comes out, it will nail their coffin. But just in case it doesn't, she decides to remove her name off the piece. And I thought that was very telling and exposed her in terms of how scared she really was. Because not only does she go behind Elena's back, she basically abandons her, which means Elena is going to have to bear the brunt of this article once it comes out. Everyone will be blaming her. Throughout this episode, Elena was really paranoid about Leela using her. And in that moment, we see that a lot of her paranoia was entirely justified. Now, Leela's belief that a writer can have a huge impact is not entirely untrue. However, if such an article came out, it's very unlikely that the journalist would survive for very long. These types of investigations never go well for the reporter. And Elena has daughters, and she's just not really in a place to put her life at risk for a couple of mobsters. And when the article does come out, Elena notes how shocked Leela was and how humbled she was, because she was just wrong. She made a bad call. And a lot of Leela's ideas about a writer are rooted in her childhood. She has this idealistic image of what Elena is capable of. But of course, following Elena around, we realize that the life of a writer is not that great. It's a really difficult life. Not a lot of people make it. And this was kind of the end of that childhood ideal. Now, once the article comes out, Elena's sister cuts her off and Marcello pays her a visit. And I have to say, the actor who plays Marcello is excellent. I love his walk. I love his whole aesthetic. I believe him as a dangerous individual. He really does seem like someone who's about to bash your face. And I didn't know what he was going to do. He makes it very clear that their efforts were futile and they were just super dumb for trying. And then he just walks off with such arrogance. And again, this is not a man you want to mess with. I believe that he will kill you. Now, the episode ends with Leela and Enzo beating Gennaro because he is completely addicted. And this is the first time we're seeing how bad it is. He is so far gone. And I think his addiction is having a huge effect on her daughter. And towards the end, you can see that she's trying to restore some type of order. And that last shot of Elena, you can see it in her face, listening to the screams coming from upstairs, seeing her daughter stressed about Leela's son. She's kind of wondering, what am I still doing here? Why am I here? Because at this point, it's time to go. So I think there was a lot to unpack here. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.